Do you name the birds that come to you, like that are admitted in the hospital or who are rescued and brought to your hospital? Do you name them?
No. I used to name them earlier, but the birds that remain in captivity with us who are grounded, or those who are going to be used for education purposes afterwards, only then we name them. It's too difficult to keep naming them because then again that sense of attachment becomes more. And it's good to bond with the bird, but it's not good to bond too much where you also imprint on the bird again, and then the bird doesn't go back into the wild properly. Again, our ultimate goal is the bird should be wild. So for me, when my bird either comes to bite me or chases me in its enclosure, that means I've done the best job I can. I mean, that bird can be released back into the wild successfully. So that's a very big thing for me, and that's why I don't name my birds that often. Because we get too many birds also. You have too many birds to name and too many to take care, and naming them makes it a personal thing, which you can't. They belong to nature and they belong back into the wild.
If you were to take a retrospective look, what has the whole process of bird watching taught you?
At a personal level, birding and bird watching has taught me a lot of good things in life. Patience is always the biggest thing. Dealing with a lot of difficult situations, it helps you face and overcome a lot more problems in life than you would assume otherwise. Because you see birds, they are sensitive to minor changes in the environment. They are sensitive to people and our anthropogenic activities that we have. But yet, they are so resilient. They are surviving in temperatures of 45, 46, 47 degrees. They are surviving in rain, they're surviving in cold. They survive throughout any kind of temperature that nature throws at them. They survive at high altitude, they survive at low altitude. They are very versatile. They will go through a lot to feed their babies and take care of the kids, nurture them, raise them. The babies may die. Birds will lay a clutch of 5 to 6 eggs. Only 1 or 2 will survive when it comes to adulthood. And yet they go through that same painstaking effort every year of doing that, and they get the result, and they're happy with that little bit of result that they get. So that teaches me personally a lot of things. It makes me a better person where I am more tolerant of other people around me as well, their behavior. I shouldn't let other external factors dictate the terms of my nature. I shouldn't try and dictate my own terms or put my own viewpoints over them as well. Because as you see birds in a social setting, you have birds of many different feathers flocking together, and birds have a lot of social behavior. They have community foraging, where one bird or two birds would take up the role, species again, different species foraging together, where you have one or two particular species taking up the role as a watchman, alerting the other species that are foraging where any predator or anything else comes into contact with them. And at the same time, you have different foraging done at different levels. You have birds like babblers and all that will be foraging, turning over the leaf litter where to find insects. And then you have birds like egrets or other flying birds like flycatchers who utilize the babblers' disturbance in the undergrowth for insects that come out and start flying out, and they catch those insects. So it's all a community, network that they have. It's similar to what we should have as human beings as well.
During the making of our documentary, we had spoken about your childhood and how that helped you get into this world of bird conservation, right? Can you share that with the listeners as well, like your origin story?
So in that way, well, I've always been around birds and animals from a very, very young age. And by very young age, I mean a few, like 2 years old and 3 years old only. I've been picking up pigeons and ducks and geese and chickens and roaming around with them. So my grandparents, both the sides, my maternal and paternal, both are from Ajmer, Rajasthan. And they used to live in the railway colony out there, where they would raise chickens and ducks and a few other birds that they would have. They always had dogs and cats, always around them. And not just breed dogs, we would have mainly the strays, the indies, as they were the more hardier breeds to keep, easier to maintain, and much better to train. So from when I was 5 and 6 years old, I used to be going inside the chicken coops and the turkey coops, cleaning out the cages with my grandfather, picking up eggs, helping them collect the eggs, cleaning out the cages, putting fresh food and water for them, going and cutting vegetables, grass, and feeding them. And apart from that, my grandparents would also, they in fact in the community would be the ones where people would bring often birds and give them and let them raise it. So my grandfather would taught me how to feed birds, where they would chew up the food as a parent bird would, and then they would take out the chewed up food and then feed the baby birds the same thing. So they would tell me the same, like, look, a parent bird, she feeds her baby by digesting the food and then throwing it up and then feeding the baby bird. So we do the same. We chew up the food and then we make it a paste and then we feed the baby birds the chewed up food paste after that. So it's a bit unorthodox, but that's the way people have been raising in the olden days birds and everything else. You didn't have fancy formula feeds and syringes and feeding tubes and all the equipment that we have nowadays. But that's why I've been brought up in that setting where you've always been one with the animals and birds. Like my grandfather would tell me where we would go to sit down to have lunch, but before we have lunch, all our animals and birds have to be fed. They need to be done. In the morning session is only the feeding and the cleaning. So all of them would be fed, cleaned, and then after we're done with everything else, only then we would sit and have our meals. And it would be the same in the evening. Finish the second round of everything else, then you get your tea and your snacks and everything else after that. So that's why I've never had a fear of birds and animals, which most people have as an early age. My parents have also played a major role in this, because when we used to live in a 1 BHK flat, when we shifted to Ahmedabad, they would bring pigeon babies and crow babies which people would throw out from their houses, because again, Diwali time, you're cleaning your house, so you don't want the dirty pigeons and the nests in your house. And they would go and throw it in the garbage bins or in the places around. And my father or my mother invariably would go and pick up those baby birds, bring them home, raise them, because that's how they were raised, to bring up orphaned birds and animals that they find. And because we had our limitations in our house and our upbringing, we couldn't keep as many pets as we would like. So that's why feeding stray animals and birds was always a big thing. And whatever birds we would bring up would get, of course, the best quality food that we could afford and we would eat at that point of time as well. So even from that, I used to learn the different kinds of feed that would be good. And that is how I developed that interest. And apart from birds, we would always also raise squirrels. Maybe squirrels were also a very common household pet at that point of time. But, so the other thing also is no animal was kept at my house as a pet permanently. They were always released back into the urban wild or into the wild after they've been raised. Never ever had we had a pet until now, when I've been in college and I could take my own decisions and keep my own birds. It was when we actually got birds, like exotic birds, to be kept as pets. Other than that, any bird we would raise would always be sent back to the wild. So I've been taught that from an early age, that if it's a wild bird, it's meant to be wild. You don't keep it at home. And that's the way it is supposed to be.
If I may ask, what is your dream?
So in India, wildlife rehabilitation and our breeding centers are quite lacking in resources and knowledge. Unless it's privately run, the government really can't manage or doesn't manage anything that's of its really good level. And people have always told me, like, since again my great-grandfather and all my other great-grandparents are Britishers, and we are Anglo-Indian by nature that way. So people have always told us, like, why don't you go outside India, work there, learn more about the species there, you'll be able to work better there, you'll be able to do much more, much better. You're more in that line, rather than like the Indian mentality of the animals and birds. But that's not what I actually want to do. My actual goal in life is to set up a proper breeding center and a rehab center for birds of prey in India, where it's a massive facility where we can keep all the disabled raptors and use them for education purposes and for breeding purposes. And those babies that we raise will be released back into the wild to maintain a certain a number of those birds. Because raptors are also a key species in the entire bird ecosystem. And raptors are very, very important. If any decline of any raptor species, other species of birds tend to take over more. And then that has a very drastic change in the overall ecosystem. So predators and prey have a very important connection. And my long-term goal is to set up a complete breeding center and a rehab center for endangered species of birds of prey and even endangered species of birds, and send them back into the wild. Because India, like I said earlier, we have so much scope, but we are lacking in that. We just need a direction and a push in that direction, and the government needs to support that as well. So sooner or later we will have that. Let's see. We can hope for the best at least. Since we are following the developed countries like America and the UK blindly, so we can also follow these policies as well. Because why should we always wait for a foreigner to come and tell us, oh, look, your vultures are dying, your lions are dying, your leopards are dying. Why don't you save them? Why don't you give it to us? We'll save them for you. Why? India is a country where we've got so much diversity. Our people, our villagers, our tribals, everybody have been so in tune with nature and so one with nature for a really, really long point of time. We, at the rate of development that we are going, are losing out on that. And we need to come back to our roots, in fact. There are so many communities that are working with nature. They do hunt occasionally, but that's not poaching. That's not a rampant hunting for pleasure. It's hunting because it's part of their community. It's a sustainable way of hunting, and that's been going on for centuries now. And it's not having a massive toll on what they've been doing. But at the same time, people think that it's these communities and the tribals and the backward people who are creating more trouble, and whereas actually it's all our activities, our industrializations, our development that is causing most of the problems. So we should actually, as Indians, come back to our roots. We need to focus on that. We don't need to always wait for some foreigner to come and tell us what to do and how to do it. We need to take initiative and show them that this is how we do it.
I know that you can imitate a few birds and their calls. How did that begin, and can you show us what those sound like?
A lot of times I also imitate the birds when we get them in captivity, especially with the babies, because feeding them makes it easier when they respond to the call of the parent bird. So apart from playing, you can play back calls as well, but I prefer to mimic the sound that the birds make, and I try and whistle out the same calls or mimic the calls that the adult birds would do. And once the baby opens the mouth, it's easier to feed him, and the baby responds to that as well. So the coppersmith barbet in particular, it's called the coppersmith barbet because of that metallic ringing sound that it has when it calls out, and that sound is heard, and it can be heard for quite a distance. It's a very distinct sound. It goes something like this. And that sound continues for quite some time over a longer duration. That can be a general call for the bird to attract its mate and let other birds know that it's here. So they have a wide variety of hisses and other calls. A lot of different birds have that as well. So birds like barn owls don't really hoot. People think owls hoot. Owls don't hoot. Barn owls don't hoot. They have more of a screech or a hiss. Barn owls something like sss, sss, sss. So that's what a barn owl sounds like. Another common species is the spotted owlet, a really tiny species of owls, which is an insectivorous bird, and you hear them in the night. Their calls are very frequently heard, but the birds are not seen that often. The calls like so birds, as you know, have different kinds of calls, for different types of calls, for different predators, for feeding, for calling its mate. So as a bird watcher, when we're observing a bird feeding its baby, we try and also listen out to see what kind of sound it makes for the baby to know that it needs to open its mouth. Because very often, and especially with birds which have hidden nests, the baby will be hidden until the parent calls out. Only then the baby lifts his head up from the nest and calls out again. Other than that, the baby stays completely hidden inside the nest itself. The shikra is another bird which I mimic, and they respond to that as well. Shikra sounds something like so that's the common call of the shikra. The black kite, the most common kite that we get out here. The adult sounds like, the call sounds like. So that's the higher call of the kite. Sparrows occasionally. Oh yeah, so the bulbuls also respond to this call as well, the babies especially. One interesting aspect with you talking about bird calls and I was telling you all about the koels, parasitic behavior of the koel, laying its eggs in other birds' nests. So what happens is we get baby birds, koels, when they're abandoned also, the nest breaks and everything else, and they don't respond to any other crow calls because they're not raised by crows. So the koel chick imitates the call of the foster bird, and that's how I have accumulated data, and I know which species of bird was raising this particular koel baby. So like babblers, jungle babblers, they have a very distinctive call, no? The seven sisters that they come together. So because the jungle babblers like. So the baby koel would open its mouth every time I did that call, which then told me that that baby koel was raised by babblers and not by a crow. Similar when it was in a tailor bird's nest. The tailor bird's call, because both the chick was calling out, that lets me know which species of bird was raising that bird. So the tailor bird had a high-pitched whistle. So the baby koel was imitating that high-pitched whistle, calling the parent bird to feed it. So that's the frequent chip, 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 chip call that they do. And so that's what sometimes even the babies respond to as well. Tree pines actually are very amazing mimics. They have a wide variety of calls. So this one will only respond to the other one sometimes, but like. So again, it's part of a different call that they have. So yeah. And the other birds, one other one is the cowcle, the crow pheasant. Very common bird, and we used to have one in the aviary, a single male, and he would keep calling out every time. So I would started mimicking him as well, so that he would have some company, and he would respond back to my call. So they have a very deep booming call when they go like. And that booming call would then be reflected back, and that bird would immediately come and call back. So that back and forth would be there because again the bird was disabled, so we would keep on calling and got him used to us in that way.
And thus we reach the end of our conversation, Sherwin. Thank you so much for your time and efforts towards wildlife conservation. You really are an inspiration to many. That's it, folks. Thank you for staying till the end, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation and even got to learn a few things that you didn't know earlier. I certainly did. If you're curious and wish to watch my documentary, please find the link attached to this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and peace out.